My grandfather used to say that the heart is just a muscle, and muscles don't forget what you feed them every morning. He was 61 years old when he carried a full load of split timber from the back barn to the woodpile in the middle of January, uphill both ways, and came inside with color in his cheeks and no shortness of breath. His hands were warm, his step was steady. He ate his breakfast first thing that morning, the same way he had every morning since he was a boy, the same way his own father had before him, and his father's father before that. That breakfast is what I want to talk to you about today. Because here where I live, we don't have a word for heart trouble the way the English world seems to. Not that we're strangers to hard living. We work hard, we eat hearty, and we don't go to the doctor for every ache. But when I look at what happens to people out in the modern world once they pass 60, the swollen legs, the breathlessness, climbing stairs, the hands that go cold and stay cold, the chest that tightens in the night, I think about that breakfast. And I think they've simply never been told what we were taught before we could read. This isn't complicated. It isn't expensive. You don't need a prescription, a supplement bottle, or a kitchen full of fancy appliances. What you need is the same table that was in my grandmother's kitchen, and by the end of this, you'll know exactly what was on it and why it mattered. But first, I want to tell you something that may surprise you, because most people, when they hear the word Amish breakfast, picture something that sounds like the opposite of heart healthy. And honestly, they're not entirely wrong about what they're picturing. What they're wrong about is what they're missing. Here where I was raised, breakfast was never a small thing. It wasn't a cup of coffee and a piece of toast over the sink. It wasn't a yogurt cup you peel back in your car. Breakfast was the anchor of the whole day. My mother was up before the sun, and by the time my father came in from the first chores, there was warmth at the table, steam rising from the pot, and everyone in the household sat down together. That part matters. I know it sounds like just a detail. I'll come back to it, because it turns out it's not a detail at all. Now, I want to tell you about something I noticed when I was a young man, something that took me years to understand fully. Every fall, when we'd go to market or have dealings with folks from the English towns nearby, you'd see men my father's age who moved like they were carrying something heavy inside them. Careful on the steps, slow turning their neck, rubbing their hands together like the blood just wasn't reaching the ends. My father used to watch them with a kind of quiet concern. He never said anything unkind, but once riding back home, he looked out the window at the fields going by and said, "Amos, it's not their years, it's their mornings." I didn't understand that until I was much older. The modern world has a morning routine that works against the heart in three specific ways. Most people over 60 do at least two of them every single day without knowing it. And the third one, the one nobody talks about, is the one I think does the most damage slowly, over years, quietly. Let me start with the first, because it connects to something my mother did that I didn't even recognize as intentional until I was well past 40. Every single morning, without exception, regardless of season, regardless of what work was coming that day, there was something warm on that table made from whole grain. Not the instant kind, not something that came out of a paper packet with 17 words on the label you can't pronounce. Real oats, soaked overnight the way my grandmother showed my mother, cooked low and slow in the morning with whole raw milk from our own cow, sometimes with a spoonful of raw honey stirred in after, sometimes with dried apple or raisin from the cellar, never without a pinch of cinnamon. Now, I'm not going to tell you that bowl of oats cures anything. That's not how I was taught to talk about food. But I will tell you this, that grain, prepared that way, does something for the blood that the English world's breakfast does not. When you strip a grain down, grind it, puff it, press it into a flake and coat it with sugar and put it in a box with a cartoon on the front, you've taken out the part that slows digestion down. You've made something that hits the blood fast, spikes it, and then drops it. And when your blood sugar crashes before 9 in the morning, your heart is already working harder than it should. Your body's already in a kind of quiet panic. And if that happens every morning for 30 years, it adds up. We were never taught that the grain was medicine. We were taught that the grain was food, and that food meant something whole that your body recognized and could use. There's a difference. And most people in the modern world haven't felt that difference in so long, they've forgotten it's possible. But here's where I need to slow down for a moment, because the oats are only the beginning. And if you think the oats alone are what I'm building toward, the thing my father meant when he said it's in the mornings, you're going to be surprised by what comes next. Because the second part has nothing to do with what you eat. It has everything to do with when you move. Here on the farm, you don't sit down for breakfast first and then think about moving later. By the time you sit down, you've already moved. You've already been outside. You've already done something with your hands and your legs. In the winter, maybe it was just walking to the barn and back, checking on the animals, carrying water. In the summer, it might have been a full hour of real work, but the body was warm before the food came. The blood was already circulating. The joints were already loose. The English world does this exactly backwards. You wake up, you lie there, maybe you check something on your phone, you shuffle to the kitchen, you sit down again, you eat, and then maybe later you go for a short walk if you remember and the weather's nice. And the heart, which is a muscle, which needs to be asked to work before it's asked to rest, never quite gets that signal. My grandfather, the one who reached 96 with his mind sharp and his hands steady, he never sat still for the first hour of the day. Not once in his adult life, as far as anyone in our family could remember. Not fast, not hard, just steady and purposeful, walking, carrying, bending. He didn't call it exercise, he called it mourning. I want to be straightforward with you here. I'm not a doctor. What I share with you is the wisdom of the way we live, passed down through generations of people who worked this land and stayed strong on it. Whatever you do with your body, talk to your doctor first, especially if something's been bothering you. But I will say this, movement before breakfast is one of the oldest things our people do, and it costs nothing. Now here's a good moment to ask yourself something. If you've been watching this long, you've already recognized something in what I'm describing. Something familiar, something you maybe once had and lost, or something you always suspected was true. I'd be grateful if you stayed close to this channel, because everything I share here comes from inside the community I was born into, and there's much more to tell. If you haven't yet, you're welcome to subscribe and stay close. Next time I'll be talking about the way we handle what the modern world calls inflammation, something my grandmother had a name for long before the doctors gave it that word. But first I want to tell you about the third thing, the one that took me the longest to understand and the one I believe matters most of all. My father used to say that the heart is the most honest organ in the body. It tells you the truth about how you're living, but only after years of keeping your secrets. And the secret that most people in the modern world carry into their mornings, the one that sits heavier on the heart than the food or the stillness, is loneliness. Now, I know that sounds soft, bear with me. When you sit down for breakfast here where I live, you are never alone. Even if the house is quiet that morning, you are surrounded by the weight of a routine that has been done by your people for longer than you can count. Your grandmother sat at a table like this, her mother before her. The act of eating that bowl of warm grain in the morning is not just about what's in it, it's about being part of something that continues. And that feeling, that anchor, that belonging, does something to the nervous system that no supplement has ever been able to replicate. The English world has a name for it now. They call it the stress response. They talk about cortisol and what it does to blood pressure when it runs high day after day, year after year. I don't use those words, but the truth behind them is old. When a person eats alone, rush, standing up, already worried about the day before it started. The body hears that, the heart hears it. And over 65, 70 years of living a heart that is spent every morning in a state of low-level urgency is a heart that has never truly rested. Here where I live, the morning meal is a pause. It is a signal to the body that everything is all right, that you are among your people, that the day begins not in panic but in order. My mother set that table every morning like it mattered. Because it did. The warmth of the room, the sound of familiar voices, the same bowl, the same spoon, the same cinnamon in the air. That routine is not just comfort, it is medicine for the nervous system that costs nothing and requires only the willingness to protect that time. You cannot always replicate a table full of family. I understand that. Many people watching this are living alone, or far from the people they love, or in circumstances that make a quiet morning table feel impossible. I'm not asking you to pretend otherwise. I'm asking you to find the smallest version of that pause. Sit down, use a real bowl, make something warm with your hands, even just oatmeal on the stove, even just 5 minutes, before the phone, before the news, before the worry. Let the body know that morning is safe. That is the whole of it, brought together, movement before eating to wake the blood. Whole grain cooked the slow way to steady the blood, and a real pause at the table to quiet what drives the blood too hard. My grandfather lived to 96. My grandmother passed at 91, in her own kitchen, with her own hands still useful. Neither of them ever had a day in a hospital from a heart condition. Neither of them ever took a pill for their circulation. Their mornings were not complicated. They were just faithful. The same quiet faithfulness, repeated 10,000 times, that becomes the foundation of a long and steady life. The English world calls growing old a decline. We just call it living, and we tend it like a garden. Now, I want to ask you something, and I mean this sincerely. Tell me in the comments, what's the one thing your body struggles with most after 60? I read what you share. It shapes what I bring to this space next. Stay close, my friend, because next time I'll share the way we handle the cold and the stiffness that the modern world calls inevitable and old age, something the English world forgot we ever knew how to carry.